The rain had just started to drizzle over the bustling streets of Lagos that evening, making the orange glow of the street lamps blur into a hazy halo. I remember gripping Adi's hand tightly as we crossed the muddy road to the little one-room apartment we called home. She had her hair wrapped in a worn scarf, her sandals splashed with brown water from the potholes. She was smiling, that calm, unshakable smile that always made me forget the chaos of the world. But that day, her smile did nothing to ease the knot in my stomach. It had been 6 months since I last spoke to my mother. 6 months since she stood in the center of her pristine sitting room, dressed in her expensive Ankara and gold necklace, and told me, "If you marry that girl, Kelechi, you are no longer my son." Her voice had been cold. There was no trembling in it. No hesitation. Just finality. I had expected anger, maybe disappointment, but disownment? From my own mother? That day, I realized money meant more to her than my happiness. Adi's wasn't from wealth. She sold akara and pap with her mother in a small market stall. She didn't own flashy clothes or expensive jewelry, but her heart was richer than anything my mother's money could buy. And I knew, without a doubt, that I wanted to spend my life with her. We had a simple wedding in a local church. My friends came. A few relatives from Adi's side. My father didn't attend, not because he didn't want to, but because my mother had made it clear that anyone who supported me would face her wrath. That night, after the ceremony, I sat on the edge of our bed, the faint hum of the ceiling fan above us, and stared at the single photograph we took, me in my plain black suit, Adi's in her second-hand white gown. She placed her head on my shoulder and whispered, "We may not have much, Kelechi, but we have each other. And one day, they will see." Her faith in us was unshakable. Mine was starting to tremble. 6 months later, a white envelope arrived at our door. It was hand-delivered by a driver in a pressed uniform. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from. My mother's handwriting was unmistakable, neat, sharp, deliberate. "You are invited to my 60th birthday celebration at the Ivory Hall. Attendance is expected." Expected. The word stung. No apology. No acknowledgement of the months of silence. Just an expectation that I would show up. I placed the envelope on the table. Adi's picked it up, read it silently, then looked at me. "Are we going?" she asked softly. I wanted to say no. I wanted to ignore it and pretend she didn't exist. But deep down, a part of me still craved her acceptance. Still longed for her to look at Adi's and see what I saw, a woman of strength, dignity, and love. We didn't have fancy clothes. Adi's wore her best, a turquoise gown she'd bought for 3,000 naira from a roadside seller. She braided her own hair, pinning it up neatly. I ironed my only suit. When we arrived at the Ivory Hall, the difference between our world and my mother's was like night and day. Valets in crisp white shirts opened the glass doors. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the high ceiling. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted peppered goat meat. Guests in glittering attire floated around, sipping champagne and laughing politely. I caught a few eyes flicking toward us, their smiles tightening when they saw Adi's modest gown. Then I saw her. My mother stood near the center of the room, wearing a golden lace dress, her head wrapped in a gheli so large and elaborate it looked like a crown. She was laughing with a group of wealthy friends. When her eyes found mine, the laughter died instantly. She walked over slowly, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. "Kelechi," she said, her tone stiff. "Good evening, Mama," I replied. Her eyes slid over to Adi's. "You brought her." Before I could answer, one of her friends joined us. "Ah, so this is the girl you chose over your family?" she said with a mocking smile. Adi smiled politely, greeting them both. I felt the tension in my jaw tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. As the night went on, dinner was served. The waiters moved swiftly, their uniforms spotless, their trays balanced with elegance. But something strange began to happen. The first waiter came to our table with plates of jollof rice and goat meat. He set mine down, then turned to Adiz with a warm smile. "Here you go, Madam Manager." I froze. Madam Manager? Before I could process it, another waiter arrived with bottled water. "Madam Manager, should I bring your special drink now?" Adiz smiled politely and nodded. My mother, who was sitting 2 tables away, was now staring at us, confusion written all over her face. It didn't stop there. Each time a waiter came by, they addressed Adiz with unusual respect. "Madam Manager, would you like more suya?" "Madam Manager, your seat is comfortable?" The whispers started spreading around the hall. People turned to look at us. My mother's friends leaned in to ask her questions she couldn't answer. Finally, during dessert, the head waiter, a tall man in his late 40s, came over to our table. He bowed slightly to Adiz before speaking. "Madam Manager, we are grateful you chose to have your staff serve tonight. It is an honor for us." I blinked. "Staff?" I asked. The man smiled. "Yes, sir. Madam Manager owns the catering company that was hired for this event. Without her, there would be no food on these tables tonight." My head whipped toward Adiz. She was blushing slightly, avoiding my gaze. That's when it hit me. All those early mornings she left the house. All the long hours she spent at the shop. I thought she was still selling akara at the market. I never realized that over the past 6 months, she had quietly grown her small stall into a full-fledged catering business, one good enough to serve at my mother's elite party. The murmurs around the hall grew louder. People now looked at Adiz with new eyes, not as the poor market girl who stole a rich woman's son, but as a businesswoman who commanded respect. I glanced toward my mother. Her face was unreadable, but her fingers were tapping her wineglass nervously. She didn't say a word. She just kept watching us, her pride and prejudice crumbling in real time. As the night went on, I felt a swirl of emotions, pride for my wife, anger at my mother's blindness, and a bittersweet ache knowing that even this revelation might not erase the months of pain. When we finally left the hall, the rain had stopped. The streets were glistening under the moonlight. Adiz walked beside me in silence until I stopped and took her hands. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked softly. She smiled that same calm smile from months ago. "Because, Kelechi, I didn't want to prove them wrong with words. I wanted to prove them wrong with results." That night, I realized something my mother had yet to understand: wealth isn't measured by the weight of your gold necklace, but by the strength of the person who stands beside you when you have nothing. And Adiz, she was the wealthiest person I knew. We were just about to leave the ivory hall when a familiar, commanding voice echoed from behind us. "Kelechi. Adiz. Stay." It wasn't a request, it was an order. My mother's heels clicked against the floor as she approached, her gaze slightly tilted now, as though the weight of the evening had made it shift. The other guests were still mingling, but their eyes followed us like hawks. She didn't speak until we stepped outside into the dimly lit corridor near the service entrance. The sound of plates clinking and staff laughter drifted from the kitchen. She faced Adiz directly. "So, all this time, you have been hiding what you do?" Adiz's voice was calm. "I wasn't hiding, Mama. I was building." My mother's lips tightened. "Building? You had my son living in a shoebox apartment while you were making money from serving my guests?" I stepped forward. "Mama, she didn't owe you an explanation. You disowned me. You wanted nothing to do with us." Her eyes snapped to me. "I disowned you because you threw away your future for a poor girl." Adiz didn't flinch. She simply said, "Poor in your eyes, Mama. Not in God's eyes. Not in my husband's eyes. And certainly not in mine." There was a beat of silence. For a moment, I thought my mother would soften, but instead, her chin lifted higher. You may have impressed these people tonight, but you will never be family to me. I felt the sting in my chest. I wanted to shout, to remind her that the same woman she insulted had just fed her entire guest list. But Adiz touched my arm gently. Let's go, Kelechi. We turned to leave, but then the headwaiter, the tall man from earlier, walked past with 2 trays. He stopped briefly, looked my mother in the eye, and said, Madam, you raised a good son. And he chose a good woman. Don't let pride blind you. He walked away before she could respond. My mother stood frozen, her fingers gripping the edge of her wrapper. We took a kiki back to our apartment. Adiz leaned her head against my shoulder, and I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on both of us. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even sad. She just looked tired. Kelechi, she said softly, sometimes people need to lose you completely before they realize what you're worth. I didn't answer. My mind kept replaying my mother's face, that stubborn, guarded expression that had no place for forgiveness. I wondered if she would ever change. That night, I didn't know that the next time I saw my mother, it would be under circumstances that would force her to face everything she had denied. 2 weeks passed without a word from my mother. I assumed she had buried herself back into her wealthy circle, pretending Adiz and I didn't exist. But one humid Tuesday afternoon, while Adiz was kneading dough for meat pies, my phone rang. It was my cousin, Chinedu. Kelechi, it's Mama. She collapsed at the market. They rushed her to St. Luke's Hospital. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. My mother, who never set foot in a public market unless it was to buy imported fabrics, had collapsed in the middle of the crowd. We grabbed a cab and raced to the hospital. When we arrived, I found her lying in a ward bed, her ghillie gone, her hair a mess, her wrists weak against the white sheets. She looked smaller somehow. Vulnerable. The doctor explained she had a severe drop in blood pressure and had almost fainted completely. She needed rest, medication, and, for the next few days, constant care. I expected my mother to dismiss Adiz, to refuse her help, but when Adiz stepped forward with a basin of water and a clean towel, my mother didn't move. She just stared at her. Adiz wiped her face gently, adjusted her pillows, and even fed her spoonfuls of warm pepper soup. Not once did she speak of the insults, the rejection, or the humiliation she had faced. That night, when everyone else left, my mother whispered, "Why are you doing this?" Adiz paused, then said quietly, "Because you are my husband's mother. And because love is not something we give only when it is returned." For the first time, I saw my mother's eyes soften. She didn't cry, but something in her posture changed, a tiny surrender in her pride. When she was discharged 3 days later, she asked us to take her home. Inside her lavish sitting room, she sat in her favorite armchair and looked at me. "Kelechi, I was wrong." The words were quiet, almost fragile. "I thought wealth was the only way to secure your future. I forgot that character, determination, and love can build more than money ever could." She turned to Adiz. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. But, if you will allow it, I would like to know you. Truly know you." Adiz smiled gently. "We start today." Months later, whenever my mother hosted guests, she would beam with pride and say, "Have you met my daughter-in-law? She owns the finest catering company in the city." But for me, the most important moment was not her public praise, it was seeing her and Adiz cooking together in the kitchen one afternoon, laughing like old friends. Pride can build walls that keep love out, but humility tears them down. My mother learned that night at her birthday, and in the hospital days later, that true wealth lies not in gold, but in the people who stand beside you when you have nothing. And as for me, I learned that patience, paired with quiet strength, can heal even the deepest wounds between family.